Welcome to the Creative Condition podcast, an ongoing series of conversations and considerations to help people understand and embrace their own unique creativity for fulfilling lives and brilliant careers. My name is Ben Talon. I'm an illustrator and author, and I bring 16 years of creative industry experience working with the New York Times, The Guardian, the Premier League, and more. And I invite designers, artists, psychologists, scientists, coaches, athletes, sensitivity experts, and all kinds of thought leaders to help us broaden our knowledge of creativity. Creativity is a fundamental pillar of human happiness, a vital ingredient in the solutions to our problems, but so often misunderstood. The show is supported by founding sponsor and B Corp, Illustration X. Take a look at their stunning range of illustrators and animators at illustrationx.com. If you like the music for the show, it's by Dirty Freud, who you can listen to now on Spotify and all good music streaming services. Today I'm talking about the importance of a vision. Is it important? Do we need one? It's not going to be for everyone, but I'm going to sit down because I've been at a personal crossroads and take you through my feelings as I physically draw my vision. It's an exercise from the Creative Condition coaching program. It's mentioned in the book. Some people love to do this kind of work, some people don't, but have a listen, see what you think. Maybe you want to create yours. How much do we dream under capitalism, and what do we have to do to break that down into something realistic and affordable? Let's get into it. This is the Creative Condition. How are you doing, guys? I hope you are well. This is a little pause on the guests in recent weeks. It's been a busy period. We've been pinging around from TBWA, incoming global CEO Erin Riley, to the wonderful Joanna Henley, artist and mentor, Professor Carlos Moreno, urban planner, talking about community, creativity at the heart of urban design, and so much more. And before the next run of guests, kicking off with New Yorker staff writer Kyle Chaker, and author of Filter World, by the way, Filter World, How Algorithms Have Flattened Culture, a tremendous book that I'm going to do on an upcoming episode, which is the Creative Condition reading list. It's been a busy period, so I wanted to just take a little circuit breaker, a little pause to sit down, because I've been at something of a personal crossroads recently with my own creativity. I found that I was a little directionless. Now, that might sound a bit weird for someone who is carrying a lot of creative projects, is involved in a lot. I found myself described recently as prolific by a few people, you know, when you get tagged in posts and mentioned, and it's not wrong, but sometimes I'm guilty of being like a bit of a bull in a china shop. Now, if you've read the Creative Condition book, you might have read the bit where I talked about personality and using the kind of top trumps game format to assess your own personality and look at what that means for your creativity and considering everything with duality. So this is also on the Creative Condition Anatomy of Creativity map, the new thing that I've released recently. You might have seen it on the shots on the socials. It's essentially a kind of universe of all the things that influence creativity, and on this map I explain in the opening paragraph the importance of the duality of everything. Now, that's looking at everything as to what it can be, what's the range on each trait. So in terms of personality traits, I mentioned that I'm quite haphazard by nature, I'm quite clumsy. You would file that away as a bad thing, something to work on, and yes, around the house that is the case. I do try to work on that and just slow down a little bit. And I try to focus on one thing at a time to overcome my tendency to be scatterbrained and to knock stuff over. And, you know, it's kind of not a very sexy trait. However, and I've mentioned this many times on this show, so apologies to regular listeners, that is also the genesis of my artistic style. It's very raw. It's very chaotic. There is some order to it, of course there is. I have to have spatial intelligence, which is something that designers are good at, and artists, and that's kind of, you know, arranging all this madness. And any one of my illustrations has very much got a curated composition, and there is often a lot of curation in that chaotic creativity. And when you consider that in terms of a personality, there is duality. So on a top trumps ranking system, you would mark that down as a 1 or a 2 if that is in the home, a part of a personality. However, in an artistic style, you flip that. There's no way I would have carried a 17-year illustration career were it not for that very same trait. So it becomes an 8 or a 9. Now, do you see where I'm going with this? This is what I've encouraged people to do in the book, and it's what I work on in my coaching, which is very new. I've soft launched it recently. If you want to work with me on that, get in there early. I am doing some early rates, doing it more affordable, working with people to help me build my confidence, get off the ground in these early sessions. So let me know, get in touch. But something that we go through in this is looking at those traits, and I ask my, the people I'm working with, my clients, to name something, to name a weakness or a flaw, and we look at that, we reconsider that in a 360 format, and it's very fun to do that. But what happened to me recently is I realised that I wasn't managing my weeks. Apologies, I'm sat with a pot of coffee today. I hope you don't mind. It's a nice informal one just to chat through, quite impromptu. And what I realised was I was very stretched. I was very stretched in my mind. I was stressed out. I wasn't, illustrations being quiet, so I was kind of stressed on that front financially. Creative Condition is quite new when you're looking at it in terms of a coaching practice and the podcast and the book and everything that's coming together. So there's a lot to do. There's a lot to develop. There's a lot to fine tune. And I was probably putting a little too much time into it. The same with the writing. And there was no rhyme or reason. There were no days that were just explicitly to be an illustrator. There were no days that were just explicitly to be head of the Creative Condition. And it was damaging all things because I wasn't committing. I wasn't feeling out. I wasn't immersing myself enough in any one of these practices to truly get into flow states. You know what I mean? So I had to sit down with my wife. Laura is always the voice of reason. She's way more organised than me, and she will pull me back from the brink. She will clear that head of mine. She will help me to get things down on paper. And after a big conversation, I said, right, okay, here's the deal. And I split the week down, and what I did was organised it into days of committing to a certain thing. And last Monday, Tuesday, my head was completely up my arse. This Monday, I'm speaking to you now on a Monday afternoon, feeling pretty good. No new work's come in. It's all right. I've learned to manage that. I've created a little record of success for myself. Look back, reminding myself that I am good. Things have been in this place many a times before. And if I go out there, act like the illustrator I know I can be at my best, things will come. So that's good. And then on the days when I'm doing the Creative Condition, it's cool because I'm excited. It feels like when you work part-time and then you get the 3 days to do you personally, you professionally, work on the dream. So you do it, and you do it with diligence, and you do it effectively with essence, and you really get into it. So as part of that kind of mending process, I have taken a part of my own advice and I have created a vision, because for me to effectively split my week and commit to things properly, give them the time they deserve, I kind of need to know where I'm going. And this whole vision thing came to me after watching the Arnold Schwarzenegger documentary on Netflix. Now, I don't know if you guys have seen this, but it's fantastic. And he talks about having the vision at the start when he first stumbled upon bodybuilding and how this thing just illuminated him, lit him up inside. And he went on to do it. And his work ethic and his determination was second to none. And everything he did was building towards that vision, be it a small step, be it a big leap, And I think it's really important to do the same thing for our creativity, particularly at times of personal crisis. So now with a little more order, I'm speaking to you on a Creative Condition day, and it feels really good because I'm packing that day full of action, because tomorrow I'm an illustrator, Wednesday I'm an illustrator, Thursday I'm an illustrator, Friday I'm back into the Creative Condition, and I will be excited about that by the time it comes around. Don't get me wrong, I sit down in the evenings, I chip away at things, I write, I do the Creative Condition, probably work a little bit more than I should, but I am building a new thing on top of a thing that I still very much love. So that's where you find me, and that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to sit down, I'm going to walk you through this vision, because I found some really interesting stuff, and I think you guys should get on with this. You should do it for yourselves. There's nothing to lose. It's actually really fun when you physically start to draw where you imagine yourself to be. What does that workplace look like? What does the landscape ahead look like? Before I continue, quick thank you to illustrationx.com, the chief sponsor, founding sponsor of this show, and B Corp. Check them out now at illustrationx.com for all their global range of illustration and animation portfolios. And these guys have been pivotal in this little awakening that I'm having at the moment, for want of a better term. I sat down with Alice. You might know Alice Desmond. She does a lot of portfolio reviews, and we're friends through our work over the years from the agency. And every month or so, we have a check-in. We look through the portfolio, we look at the direction, and we get to it. Now, Alice has given me some wonderful advice, which I've been actioning on my illustration days, which has really reconnected me with my love. And it isn't that I'd surrendered that love of it, but it's just that I didn't have focus. I wasn't feeling certain things like I had, and it was down to my own misorganisation and my kind of lack of structure. So about the vision, what is it? I sat down last night on my couch on a Sunday night and I got out a biro pen and I started drawing. And it was kind of like, what does my week look like? And when I say, what does my week look like, I'm talking about all bets are off. All restrictions are down. I've won the lottery 10 times over. And I don't have to worry about running out of money. I don't have to worry about picking the kids up from school. Now, don't get me wrong, the whole point of this exercise is to work backwards. But to go to your absolute Eden, it turns up some really interesting stuff. So the first thing that I started to sketch, I noticed quite quickly it was an industrial building, and that was quite interesting to me. And you'll have heard me waxing lyrical over time about the importance of art college. For me personally, there was just something about the scale and the scope of that building, an old industrial unit which was taken over by Keighley College at the time for their art department. Now, this site was quite sprawling. It encompassed the trades as well. So you had training bricklayers down there, you had training sparkies down there, and so there was all sorts going on, which was kind of cool because you could go into that bit and borrow tools, if you were working on something big in the arts department. And there was a bit of a crossover because I would invite down my friend Adam, who was a bricklayer. He was training at the time, and he would come in, and it was quite funny because he ended up coming on this art school trip to Paris on the first year. And I'll never forget my tutor, Bill Parker, going, right, look, he can come, it's fine, but it's on you. If he fucks up, it's on you. If he gets too pissed, if he shames the name of the college. And it was brilliant. We had a great trip, and none of that came to pass. But you can imagine that from a tutor's point of view, and I just don't think that would get signed off these days. But it was more informal back then. It was much more like art school, and Bill was a great artist. Still, he's a great artist in his own right. And but that was the nature of that building. It was buzzing. It was a hive of activity, and you walked in there. Now, I'll never forget walking in for listeners, I'm doing inverted commas now, for my work experience, which I got sat on the corner of a desk with 3 other idiots who couldn't decide what they wanted to do for a career. And we drew, we made art, and we prattted around, and we got, dragged into life drawing modules and all this stuff, and we just got to taste it. But once I tasted it, I was absolutely going back there at the first opportunity. So it changed everything for me. I loved the energy, all those partition walls that were painted white. And essentially that's the building that started to sprawl out when I sketched up this vision. Because, again, it's about working backwards. I want to be in a space like that. So that was the first recognition, because I work out of a garden studio and it's quite small. For just me, it's great. It's like it's another room in the house, it's like a mid-sized bedroom. So for just me as an office, as an external building, it's a luxury to have. It's great. I've got my books to the right behind me on a shelf. I'm looking at The Elf and the Delf now, one of my little zines that I did. I've got a wolf in sports clothing. I've got my Japanese edition of champagne and wax crayons, and I've got the creative condition. I've got books that inspire me on that shelf. I've got spray paints. I'm looking at them now. I've got pieces of old work that are stuck up there. But it doesn't fulfill that need for space and scale, which art college gave me in abundance, and I found really important personally. So the question is, how do I get that? Well, I certainly can't afford it, and I'm not going to be able to afford it very soon unless I get a spate of, 20 grand advertising jobs. Not going to happen. That's the reality. However, I'm doing this thing, aren't I? The creative condition. I'm speaking to you through it right now. And I do kind of taste that when I go to speak at universities. I get to walk back into those collective spaces, those hives of activity. And I'm hoping to do it more and more as I take this talk and workshop to agencies. Therefore, should I not be pushing for a little bit more of that through the creative condition? So that was the first realization. What you have to do with this vision is strip it back and work on the things that are attainable right now. Now, some of the things are not going to be attainable full stop, but what is it telling you? Because there will be thematic things in your very desire, your willingness to look at this, that speak to you. Maybe for some of you it means that you need to change jobs and look for something that brings you that. I think you have to take all of it seriously. There will be whims, there will be little whimsical things that you put down there that are kind of just pie in the sky, fantasyland stuff. But there's nothing wrong with doing that because it pulls up things that teach you. Now, another thing I found myself doing, I sketched up a little library on the top floor. There's a left hand, I will share this drawing by the way, there's on the socials, but there's a top left hand little window and in it I've drawn bookshelves. Bookshelves are pure magic to me. I'm lucky enough to have one in my front room. I've got one right behind me that I've just described to you now, very small, very modest. But the library at college and the library at universities were places that filled me with magic. I'd spend a lot of time in them. It was in the library at UCLan, the University of Central Lancashire, where I studied in Preston, that I discovered When Saturday Comes magazine. I knew of it, but I discovered the whole archive of it in there. And I would sit leafing through it because they used illustration and who's this person that's done this illustration and how did they get that? How did they get paid, And that was my first client working under Doug Cheeseman, who now works independently. Doug Cheeseman Design, a little nod to him. He's been a constant supporter over the decades in my work. But that was my first connection with that, and I would go in there during my dissertation and learn, and I've always found libraries a very spellbinding environment. From being a kid, I would go there in the holidays and go to reading and creative days, and I think it's tragic that we are having to fight for them in this country, like we're having to fight for everything that's good. But that's another ramble that I'm not going to take you on today. But in this drawing, there's a little library in the top left. What is that saying to me? Well, it's study. I'm doing a lot of study for the last 10 years for the Creative Condition book. For this podcast, I'm always learning new things. It gives me great vehicle to study. And now that the kids have gone to school for the first time. I've got young twins who've just started school. What I'm doing is taking the dog out a little earlier. It's giving me an hour in the morning. I'm sitting down with my morning coffee and I'm just doing an hour of studying. I'm reading a book, listening to an audiobook, taking notes, factoring it into my coaching program. It's amazing. And I'm loving that. And it's something that in this building, this vision building of mine, this mecca almost, there's a big library. I have to get fucking ladders to get up to the top shelf. This is the detail that I think you should paint into this vision of yours. And that's in there. And from that library, there's a long corridor because it has to be tucked away. Do you know what I mean? It has to give you some solitude and some quiet because that's just as important to me as the hive activity that I described from art college. And you can do that because it's your vision. And on the front of this building, it says additive. And there's a big plus. And underneath that plus are some graphic stripes because I'm reading a book about Tony Wilson at the moment, founder of the Hacienda in Manchester, an iconic club and a real creative icon in the city of Manchester. And it's what's happening here as I'm recognising as it's coming out is it's my unconscious being vomited on my subconscious. Subconscious being the kind of one between the two that we can access but not always understand. The unconscious being the one that we're not even aware of that will make us make decisions unconsciously. Conscious, of course, being the things we have control that we lead our daily lives with. But there's a library and there's a long corridor moving away from it. And there's a music room. Now, I don't have a musical bone in my body, at least I don't think I do. Maybe I do. I'm challenging that learned behaviour. I could have if I want, so could you. But there is a music room because I want music on site. I want musicians on site because they're magic people and they are real. Music is a language of it's a hidden language of the soul, isn't it? That's what they call it. So I've got a massive music studio there and I've got loads of collaborations and music's going on. Now, do you know where the genesis of this whole big collaborative building comes from? I realised as I was drawing this. This is the answer to my lottery question. You know, the what would you do if you won the lottery? There's very little that I'd change in my life. I wouldn't even have 2 cars because that's fucking up the environment. So don't do that. Walk, you lazy bastards. Joking. Half joking. But what I'd do, I would be upstairs in this building and I would come in and out. I'd be in the library. I would be hovering around the music studio, oscillating around the big open printmaking facility downstairs, because I would want to buy a building right in the middle of the city, stick it right between fucking Primark and whatever other monstrosity is propping up the high street. Tesco. Let's go for Tesco. Do you know what I mean? And I would take over this building and turn it into an absolute city centre, cultural epicenter where people could come in there. Working class kids with nothing better to do could come in there and have a free drink and talk to people, talk to creatives and encounter something new. And then there would be mentors around the place looking to help those people. Now, this leads you to another important part of what matters to me, which is community and helping others. And that's why I called this building Additive, because I care about the world. And what I wrote down, here's a little note that I wrote on this building. What lack scares me. And by that I mean, when I look my deathbed self in the eye, what terrifies me if I should never do it in my life? And I'll tell you what it is. It's going through the rest of my life serving only capitalism and corporate gain. Because I don't want that. I've got financial pressure like the rest of you, and it fucking terrifies me sometimes. However, if I have to move through this life only serving that to get by, then I've failed. I've failed at my job as a steward of this planet, as a human being. So I want that building bang in the centre of town, open doors, and I would come down and I would oversee it and I would help. I wouldn't want to be a director, because I don't want that level of commitment either. I want the freedom just to go, feel inspired for the day, come out of the library, sneak out the fire exit and fuck off. Do you know what? That's because that's me. I like my solitude. I like my quiet. It's the yin and the yang. And right now in my little garden studio, it's kind of all yin. And that's why I'm doubling down on the creative condition and why, for a while, I've been pulled a little too far in that direction for the neglect of my illustration. But now that I'm back and I'm loving my illustration, again, I'm pushing for live work, projects where I'm a part of a team, where I can collaborate, and maybe I can go into an agency and spend a bit of time working on development. Because that's important as well. It's all about the balance for me, but at the core of all of it is my independence. Because I want to finish work most days, walk down that garden and be with my kids. I've just listened to the travel news now, and it might as well be the climate crisis travel news, because every other report is about floods. It's been teeming down for the best part of 24 hours. You know, we drove to the mother-in-law's yesterday and the roads are absolutely swimming, and it's kind of like, oh fuck, right, okay. I don't want to have to travel every day. I want to travel when I need to get my fix, to go and help people and be a part of a big, spacious, collaborative environment. So do you see what's happening with this vision? This little sketch is growing, and it's very rudimentary. It's not even at the level of a decent, a concept sketch. It's not at the level of a storyboard for a film even. And do you know who else is out the front? There's these little hooded figures, and I've put them out there because I spent a lot of time on that Manchester independent music scene, and I loved all these rich characters. I loved the eccentrics of Keighley growing up in West Yorkshire in the 1980s and the 1990s. So I want those people around, and I've got trees out there, because half the time these buildings in city centres get set up and trees come down. There was a horrible report going back a few years about fucking McDonald's, which I loathe as a company, and they'd set up a new place, I think it was in Fulham, and they just whipped down these 12 mature trees to put up their flat pack, horrible restaurant, if you can even call it that. And it made me a little bit sick, so I want to move in, and I want like a massive moss roof on this place. I want trees outside. And some of you might have seen that I shared a post about biophilia the other week, and this is another component of my anatomy of creativity map, and it's about the innate human need for connection with nature. Now I'm reading a book by Richard Louv, L-O-U-V at the moment, called The Nature Principle. It's mind-blowing. It's about the importance for our physical and mental well-being of our connection with nature, of spending time in nature, outdoors, being in the present moment, and it's wonderful. It's really, really beautiful book, and it's meant that my phone stays in my pocket on the dog walks now. I'm out there running about, I'm running up little grass banks, I'm jumping off walls, I'm chasing the dog around, acting like what most people might consider a bit of a nutcase, and I don't really care about that, because that also speaks to another thing on the Anatomy of Creativity map, which is inner authority. Now, in this building, in art college, in university, in all the places that I've spent time, I had inner authority, because I knew I was supposed to be there. I was in my element. I was working towards something that filled me with purpose and filled me with magic. And I had to walk to art college. I had to get on a bus to Bradford College, where I spent a year. And I had to walk from my halls of residence and then houses in Preston to my university. And on the majority of all of those walks, I couldn't wait to be in there. I also think of Oyster Mill in Preston, one of my first studios. Anyone who's read Champagne and Wax Crayons, Riding the Madness of the Creative Industries, my debut book, will know what a great time I had in Oyster Mill, freezing cold, ex-cotton mill in Preston. Preston being the northwest in the UK, and was, it had a lot of rain coming in that region in Manchester, which made it very well set up for cotton mills. Now, I've spent a lot of my life working in former industrial units. I grew up next to Mohair Spinners, Robert Clough Mill in Keighley. It used to be a real beating heart of the Industrial Revolution, and it was on its arse by the time I was growing up, which meant that for a short time I had this a haven. It was an actual childhood haven, and we spent our weeks and our months in school holidays down there in these meadows, which have long since gone and been replaced by shitty new build houses. But for that time, it was amazing, and we had these mill caretakers who would take us for explorations around the old mill, and we had these big dusty looms in there, and would sometimes sneak in through little broken windows and hang about in these probably quite dangerous looking back, but these abandoned spaces. And our hearts were full and our heads were full of dreams. We were there, and it was our space. And that's another reason why I've drawn this space and I've drawn those trees, because it was the perfect balance of nature and industry. Nature probably because the fuckers had gone and the business had died. But for that moment, the weeds grew tall, and we were there, and we were part of those weeds. We were little fuckers who weren't wanted down there, but we grew and we were growing. So, this vision, it feels beautiful, because even on this shitty little A4 piece of paper, it mattered. And as I drew this, I kept kind of guffawing or sniggering or going, because I was having these realizations. Sorry, that sounds like a really dodgy noise, doesn't it? And Paul, Laura, my wife, would look across at me. And by the end of this vision, I kind of then went, right, well, this is never happening. I don't have this big industrial unit. I'm not going to have all these people around me all the time, unless, like I said, I win some ludicrous billionaire lottery, like a Euro Billions or whatever it's up to these days. Because then if I did, I would make this reality, and you lot would all be joining me in there, and we would be doing awesome stuff, and we wouldn't have to care about money, because I'd pay you all to do it. But it was so cool to see this thing coming alive in front of me on the page, and then going, okay, where am I getting the things that make me feel alive in this? Like I said to you about the library, I've got a library in town that needs the support. So have you, the listener. You've probably got a library that is in dire need of your support. So go and get your academics in there. Go and get your, your intelligence thrills, however else you want to describe it. But looking at this building, it was like, oh my God, life is too short. I have to make as much of this happen, even if it's fragmented and spread across lots of different practices in my life. And what I realised is I didn't particularly want a job, even when it's really, really quiet and I'm struggling. Unless some job comes up that ticks all of those boxes and still enables me to grow and to roam free as an independent, then really it's on me to make my career, to make my job. There's a brilliant job along these lines by Jem Barton that was on Rough Trade Books called Don't Get a Job, Make a Job. And it's that very sentiment. For this to work for me, to get close to this vision, I'm going to have to create this. I'm going to have to make this work. So I'm now thinking about it in my every decision. And another thing to bear in mind about the vision is that you can't make it happen immediately. Even when you do it, you draw your Eden, or you write your Eden, or you paint or make music around your Eden. That's another thing to say. You don't have to draw this. This can be any format, any artistic format you want. But the most important thing is, I think you do have to create it. This can't just be in your head, because it ends up in that same swimming madness that always happens if you do that. And that's been the point for me. That's what's led me down this kind of tricky little dead end where I'm feeling stretched and frayed and stressed, and imposter syndrome comes in. Whereas now, with this vision, I've got something to work with, and it begins to factor into my every waking decision. Even at night, I wake up with little revelations again. Just last night, my unconscious was kicking off in the small hours. I was having to make notes when I woke up. Sometimes that's a really good thing, because that's how the unconscious works. There's a whole chapter on it in the Creative Condition book. Maybe I'll read it to you soon. But you should do it, guys, because it was a really important thing for me to do, to write this down, especially little questions like what lack scares me. I was writing over the top of this building, and it's interesting how I drew like music rooms in there, even though I have no real, work at this moment in time in the music industry. But do you know why I have all this collaborative stuff? Because creativity is contagious. And by drawing this and having all this in the vision, I knew that being in a space like this, or getting access to many spaces that can give me the different bits of this vision building, that my inspiration will get fired up. I popped into the Trades Club recently in Hebden Bridge to see Mal, who runs it, and it's considered one of the coolest independent UK music venues. I think it's won number one in like NME before and stuff like that. And they have such a cult list of gigs in there and club nights. And I popped in for a project that I can't really talk about to see Mal, who runs it, and got to sit in this big open gig space upstairs with a character like Mal, who is really, really interesting, artistic guy. And we just told stories. We talked a bit about the project that I'd come to see him about. We got the business out of the way, but we just told stories and we bonded. And being in that space, being in there and feeling his love of it as a curator of gigs was infectious. And once again, I left going, fuck, I've got to get back there to see a gig. I've got to be around the characters. And Mal told me about how on any given night at the Trades Club, what you've got, because it's still a social club. It started as a working club 101 years ago, socialist working club. And it's still got that going on. So you've still got a bar and a members area that is next door to this beautiful little gig venue, intimate gig venue. And he told me that on any given night, you've got the fans of whatever band or the people who've come to see that gig overlapping with the people who are in the bar, who are members of the Trades Club. So you've got this cocktail and you get these collisions and these elements colliding that is just amazing. And I left just going, oh, I could scream. I feel so inspired. And I get that every time I do this podcast. So it's about making the little changes and working towards different parts of this vision. And I think I've rambled enough, but you get the point. And I would implore each of you to go and do the vision. And it's something that with each person that I'm going to work with as a creative coach, I'm going to be taking them through their vision and helping them to create it. And I want you to create yours. I'd love you to do it and send it to me, because I want to see your vision, because it makes me feel alive to see someone else. It's one of my biggest loves of the arts and the creative industries, because it's populated by people who are doing, or at least were doing, should be doing something that makes them feel the same way. So that's enough for me anyway. Thank you for listening, guys. I hope this has been of some use to you. It's a bit of a rambly one, but when I'm feeling impassioned like this, I like to just jump on here sometimes and break up the guest episodes. So get us your feedback. I'm prominent on LinkedIn. Best place to get me is hello@bentalon.com. Love to hear from my guests, always do. Please do rate, subscribe, and review the show, because it really, really helps. Trying to grow it all the time, trying to grow the coaching. If you'd like to work with me, get in touch. I have a limited amount of places that have opened up, doing it at an early bird discount rate. Let's have a conversation. Let's see if we can either work together regularly and build up a relationship. or do a one-off pit stop session, which is an intense one-shot. And then you'll get the Anatomy of Creativity map as part of that, and you can go on and continue the work that I set in motion. Cheers, guys. Big thank you to the founding sponsor of the show, illustrationx.com. Check out their global range of illustration and animation portfolios now, illustrationx.com. And please do take the time to help the Ukrainian Institute, ui.org.ua. They're supporting the embattled Ukrainian creative community. Such a tough time for those guys, a horrible time of war. Please do help them. I am looking for new sponsors for the show. Get in touch if you want to support creativity and get your brand shouted about on this show. Maybe we could do something cool. We could do something theme. So if you're a printer, an agency, something that's connected to what I'm trying to do, which is elevate the role and the prominence and the understanding of creativity at societal level, give me a shout. Cheers, guys. Take care. I'll see you next week with Kyle Chaker, staff writer at the New Yorker, talking about algorithmic stifling of creativity. Get his book now. It's brilliant. It's so good. Filter World, How Algorithms Flattened Culture. That's enough from me. Lovely. Have a great week, guys. Take care. Stay creative.